for me, imposter syndrome is something I still have. I'm still constantly doubting myself, thinking, do I really belong here? Am I really good at what I do? And I think that's something that particularly women sometimes face their whole life. I think it's just a matter of trying to take whatever that is, give it its space, its breathing room, because it's a valid response to have. But you have to have a time limit on that. You say, okay, I cry for 5 minutes, and then you got to keep it moving.
That was Karen Vidangos, founder of the Latinx Art Collective and senior manager of social media at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is Making It Here, a podcast by Epicenter NYC, where we spotlight the real stories behind entrepreneurs, artists, creators, and business leaders forging their own path. Every week, we dive into the hustle, the setbacks, the small wins that make the big picture possible. And every guest will have something to teach us, because making it here isn't easy. I'm your host, Amber Castillo. The art world can feel intimidating, even elitist. But for Karen, it's also been a space to challenge those barriers and open doors for others. She built the Latinx Art Collective, a free, searchable database that helps curators, collectors, and fans discover artists across the U.S. She also created Latina in Museums, an online platform that documents her candid journey navigating a field where Latinx voices are often underrepresented. Today, Karen shares how financial setbacks nearly took her off the path entirely, why community support is essential for anyone building a platform, and how she's learned to give imposter syndrome just 5 minutes before moving forward. Let's jump in.
Hi, my name is Karen Vidangos, and I am the founder of the Latinx Art Collective and senior manager of social media at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Great. And can you talk about what your organizations are all about?
Well, the Latinx Art Collective is essentially a database where it just holds information of Latinx artists across the United States. It was conceived out of love for recognition for these artists. Typically they're very underrepresented and overlooked. It's just something that I wanted to contribute to kind of elevate their work. And so, just sort of free to sign up for artists that know to look for it. And it serves as this sort of central location for anyone who's looking to find new artists to collect, or a curator to show a particular artist. They can just hop onto the database and look for them by where they live, the city, the state, if they have the name, the medium that they work in. So again, it's really, for Latinx artists in the United States, just hoping that they get the recognition that they deserve in this art world.
And when did the Latina in Museums platform start?
I think it was during grad school. It was originally conceived to be not about me, but just Latinas in general. The same theme around underrepresentation and wanting us to be seen. I tried to gather different Latinas who were posting in the art space, but it was really just me searching Instagram. Very manual, very difficult to do. That was the original intent. And then I did shift it to be about me and my journey. Kind of figured that my journey in this world is a unique one. I had a lot of ups and downs, and I wanted to be honest about that. I know the museum world, the art world can be incredibly intimidating, sometimes elitist. It's not always welcoming, but it's certainly a passion, a love that we have for the arts that many of us get into it. And so I just wanted to share what it was like for me to journey in it and hopefully inspire some people.
And was that something that you had been hearing throughout your journey, or more that you experienced yourself in terms of that intimidation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say that I've throughout my career, I've heard stories of people going through awful things, far worse than I have ever gone through myself. But yeah, you certainly, as a person of color, as a woman of color, you deal with certain microaggressions, and you can feel othered, no matter what that looks like, from the most like subtle version of it to the most dramatic and blunt aggression there is. We go through that, and I certainly did. I persevered, but It's very personal, and that's why I wanted to share it. I didn't want to hide behind the successes that I've had throughout my career. It's more than just saying, "Hey, look where I'm at. Look what I've done." It's being vulnerable, and I'm okay with being vulnerable about that honesty in my life.
Yeah, when did that moment come for you when you realized like people might need to hear this from me?
I mean, definitely in grad school, I started doing a lot of research on this very topic of underrepresentation of both art workers and artists. There is a lot of research that already exists. And so I was just fresh and new to discovering all of this and reading about it. And I realized that this is obviously a much bigger problem than just me. And I felt very like connected, very seen in that research. And at the same time, being someone who is always on social media, I realized a lot of the art world content creators, influencers, the people that were being elevated by institutions were not Black and brown women. That set off a little alarm to me. It's obviously one small piece of the puzzle of this like bigger picture in terms of representation, but it still means something to see people of color in these museum spaces, to like actually see them enjoy these spaces and talk about it. And that's kind of like where it started, of just me kind of realizing these things, and learning more about it, and then kind of just deciding like, okay, I want to share in this space as well, of talking about it and being part of that conversation.
Yeah. And was there one conversation or incident in particular that made you take that step to start?
I think it was the search of influencers, to be honest. I remember distinctly, it was like a random Saturday morning. At the time I was living at home with my parents. Woke up in the morning and I'm just like scrolling Instagram, and I follow a lot of museum institutions, galleries, art world influencers, the makers and shakers of the world. And for some reason, it just sort of like, wait a minute, where are the Black and brown women? Like, where are those influencers? And that was kind of like the start of that, I think.
When did you realize you wanted to work in the arts and museums? If you could talk us through a little bit of your journey.
I've always wanted to be involved in the arts. I grew up in a musical household. My mom used to sing professionally. My father, played a lot of different musical instruments and also managed my mom for a little bit. We had this like mini recording studio in the basement. My sister plays piano. At one point, I thought I could sing, but I can't. So I was always like involved in the arts to some respect. And I knew that, although, being a child of immigrants, my parents wanted something that was secure for me, financially secure. And so I was guided in a different direction. But I think at some point in college, I just sort of knew, like, I love you, mom and dad. I understand where you're coming from, but there's nothing else that I feel like I can do but be in the arts. And so switched my majors in undergrad from government and politics to art.
And now, fast forwarding again, what were the toughest parts of launching the platform and the database?
For myself, my own platform, there was, I don't think, any thought process at all. It was just an open diary, and I just went headfirst into just sharing what I wanted to share without thinking twice about it. That has changed a little bit. I am a little more thoughtful around what I'm saying and how I say it, but I am still very blunt and honest about my experience and my thoughts around being in this field. But I just threw myself in it, and I don't know if that's my being naive or inexperienced or what have you, but I just felt like I had something to say and I needed to just say it. I think the difficult part of that was realizing that people can respond to what you're saying. And so for the most part, it's been overwhelmingly positive and welcomed. But every now and then you get a few comments here and there that hit you a little bit harder than you think it would, and has made me think twice about, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But social media comes with the territory. And then with Latinx Art Collective, that definitely was more strategic. And it's something that I'm still very actively working on to improve and grow.
Just thinking back when you were first launching, was there anything you wish you'd known or that you'd done earlier?
I guess the answer again is yes and no. I certainly wish that I had the foresight to find partners, collaborators, more formal ways to go about this project, because there are certainly opportunities there in terms of like, getting grants, funding, things like that. But on the flip side of that, I'm also very aware that because that's such a new part of work that I'm not familiar with, it takes a lot of time and energy. And being very frank and honest, it's been very hard because I do have a full-time job. I do have people that I take care of. I try to have a social life. It's just a lot of things to balance. And so it has been very difficult to kind of like get to these other goals that I want to get to. So it's been a balancing act for sure.
Yeah, and there's so much in Latinidad and arts and that intersection. I'm wondering how you guide yourself in Latina museums and in what to highlight or, what to talk about, how to engage your audience, like how you figure out maybe this might be relatable to folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is talking about my past. I had a very windy road to get to where I am. I like to make it very clear that if you look at my resume is stacked. If you look at it on its face, incredible institutions, no gap, perfect, one might say. But then if you dig into what's really beneath all of that, and that's the part that's most important for me to share, the truth is, in the middle of my undergrad, I had to drop out. It was a financial crisis in 2007. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't think I was going to go back to school, to be honest. I started working retail, and I was very sure that my career would then be in retail and that I would grow there. And that even when I did go back to school, didn't really think about grad school. And then when I went to grad school, I didn't really know what I would do after that. So it's been like a lot of moving pieces, a lot of like ups and downs that kind of really shaped what my career is. And so looking back now that I'm in a much more stable place of success, I realized that in that time I had a lot of questions. There's a lot of things I didn't know what to ask. And so I want to bring that to the light in case there are others that also are having the same fears, doubts, questions.
Yeah. And speaking of, for others who maybe want to launch an initiative that also highlights underrepresented voices, it could be in a different field. Are there certain pieces of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, 100%. Just build that community of support. I mean, there's so many people that I've met along the way that have heard about what I'm doing and just they also want to be part of that. And so, whatever project you're putting together or initiative, no matter what field it is, it's really being able to find that community of supporters, of people, who believe in what you're doing as well, but maybe haven't found their people, haven't connected with anyone else. And so, being a source for others, and that's how you find support.
Yeah. And if there was one thing you could change about representation in the art world, what is something that you would like to address in terms of underrepresentation in the art world?
Transparency is something that's needed in the field. I mean, for those who are not like deeply invested or involved in the museum world, so many different careers that kind of seem, appear out of nowhere. You've got curators, you've got directors, development officers. And, at least for me, I can't say this for everyone. And especially being in a time of like plentiful of information on the internet, that was not the case when I was growing up. But how do I know I don't want to be in conservation or do want to be in conservation or development? I don't even know that job exists. So how do I know that that's something for me that I can connect to, that I would love? And then how would I know the path to take? There's just a lot of different things that is a little fuzzy and gray and kind of a question mark for people. And so illuminating more on that, I think, would be great for museums to do.
And is there anything else you'd like to share about, your journey or that you encourage others to think about in their own journey and at the intersection of arts and representation?
I think that it's important when you get into this field, when you're starting out or you're thinking about it, to know that it is a difficult field for many reasons, not just including the sort of barriers to access. A lot of what I talk about addresses how these barriers prevent us from really getting into the field, and they're very valid. Do you have to take out loans to go to grad school? Because grad school sometimes is required to get the jobs. When you get the jobs, most of the time in museums, they don't pay that well. Is that something that you are okay with? Can you survive on that? Bills are a reality, So there's a lot of different things here to think about, and that's just sort of the reality of the situation. And so I think it's a matter of going in with your eyes wide open. You can be incredibly successful and incredibly happy, but it can also be very hard. It caused me to question a lot. Every step of the way, I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I mean, I knew that my parents also weren't sure what I was doing, but I definitely depended on the support of friends that I had made along the way, support in many ways, not just opportunities that they would pass on to me, but, of course, the emotional support of friendship. But, I don't want to say that I was strong enough to kind of surpass all of these, tests. And, it certainly pushed me. I cried many times throughout my career thinking, you know what? I don't think this is for me. I don't think I'm tough enough. Many times when my bank account was in the negative, I remember interning at a museum and interning for far longer than I should have in the hopes of just like proving myself. But that was sort of like a push against, okay, you're interning, you're also going to school, and you're also working to pay the bills. And so the internship, which was unpaid, sort of like took away time and energy. And is it worth it? It just, there's a lot of hurdles. I guess I sort of just held my breath and like kept it moving.
I'm thinking about any kind of piece of advice you would give to folks who maybe do have more evident imposter syndrome and kind of strategies that helped you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think first and foremost, taking care of yourself and your mental health is important. I have met people who are brilliant and were really on a track of success despite any ups and downs. But at the end of the day, what they were facing in the field was not good or healthy for them. And they had decided that this is not worth it. And they moved on. I think that is completely valid. And I think that if that is something that you feel like you should do, that's a decision that you need to make. Absolutely. It is not any loss. It should not be considered a failure to make a decision for yourself, for your health. This field is tough. For me, imposter syndrome is something I still have. I'm still constantly doubting myself, thinking, do I really belong here? Am I really good at what I do? There is still a sense of comparison to others. And I think that's something that people, particularly women, sometimes face their whole life. As successful as they may be, imposter syndrome is sort of like embedded in the politics of this country in a way, really the world. And so, I wish that I had some kind of strategy of like how you get past it. I think it's just a matter of trying to take whatever that is, give it its space, its breathing room, because it's a valid response to have, but then put it aside and just try to shut that out for as long as you can to get some work done before it may come back again. And then again, you give it some breathing room and then acknowledge that it exists, but you have to have a time limit on that. You say, okay, I cry for 5 minutes and then you got to keep it moving. And that was my strategy.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that because I think often, especially, Latinas and other women of color, we just hear like push through it, right? Or push past it and just like you keep working and, it's just going to happen. We're just going to get there. And then also kind of that it's an ongoing journey, this like battle with imposter syndrome and other kinds of self-doubt. So
yeah, 100%. You have to decide whether what is happening in your environment is truly affecting you, because that'll affect you physically, aside from mentally, or if it's just a sort of like part of life moment of dealing with hardships of like things that you just, because life itself also is not going to be always great and positive and happy. There, you do have to go through some tough moments, but there's a difference between tough moments in life and situations that you should not be put in, that are not right and that are detrimental to you and your growth.
yeah.
As hard as this field has been on me, it has strengthened me and also made me the happiest I've ever been. I have to pinch myself every time I walk in through the halls of the Met and realize that I work here, realize the kind of position that I have and how far I've come. And what I want so badly is for others to have that same feeling of joy, for those who love the arts.
Oh, that's beautiful. And if you could just say where folks can find you and follow you.
People can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Latina in Museums, and please sign up at Latinx Art Collective at latinxartcollective.com.
You can follow Karen's journey on Instagram and TikTok at Latina in Museums. And if you're a Latinx artist, head over to Latinx Art Collective to add yourself to the database. That's all for today. Thanks for supporting us as we do our best to support our community. We couldn't do it without you. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at epicenter-nyc.com.